last year, I graduated from the University of Cambridge, where I studied human, social, and political sciences. Looking back, I did have the time of my life there, but thinking of the time when I was doing my applications, when I was thinking of applying to Cambridge, it was something that seemed very out of touch with my reality back then. I was born and brought up in Delhi NCR, went to a regular CBSE school, didn't know anyone who had ever even applied to Oxbridge. Um, and being able to go there was not something that was on my radar for very long. Um, and after having been through the process, I've realized that a lot of it is just stems from an information gap. Getting into Cambridge as an Indian student, yes, that requires effort, but it is very, very achievable and doable. So in this video, I kind of just want to break down what that application process looked like for me, um, give kind of tips and advice for every stage in the process, from kind of going over the entry requirements to entrance exams to choosing a college to interviews, entrance tests. I just want to cover everything. So one of the most kind of surprising elements of the application process for me was the entry requirements. I started looking into Cambridge kind of halfway through a grade 11 at school, and I didn't realize that Cambridge doesn't accept Indian curriculums independently. So if you're doing kind of CBSE, ICSE, or kind of state exams, for CBSE, you are required to have kind of 90% in all subjects, 5A1s to be eligible to be considered. Um, but beyond that, you need something called APs, or the Advanced Placement Exams. For anyone who doesn't know what these are basically US college level exams, which are kind of taught in US schools, and you are eligible for college credit in the US. If you in most colleges, if you get good score in these, you get scored out of five, and Cambridge requires you to get a score of five in at least five subjects. And I ended up taking six of them just to kind of have a safety net in case I didn't um, get a five in one of them. But now, this was my experience applying in 2022 as someone applying for a humanities subject, and these things do differ. So, increasingly, CBSE has started indicating that they would accept kind of Indian qualifications independently. So by the time you applied, what APs might not be as relevant to you. However, I would still kind of recommend taking them at least within the subject that you're applying for, especially for a humanities subject, because it does indicate kind of deeper engagement with your subject, but more importantly, it would prepare you for the entrance exam, or if you do get into Cambridge, it does prepare you for how the course looks like. In my experience, CBSE humanities was a lot more kind of rote memorization, and there was no kind of analytical essay writing at all. And your degree is completely the opposite. And I think AP served as a nice bridge to help me at least understand what analytical essay writing looks like. So that would now, before I talk about entrance exams or kind of written work, I think it's important to kind of just explain the Cambridge College system. So the University of Cambridge is divided into many different colleges. So quite similar to, let's say, how the Delhi University is divided into many different colleges. But the distinction is that your college is made up of people from all different subjects, and your classes would be the same no matter which you would go to the same lectures no matter which college you come from. So let's say I went to Peterhouse, and then someone from Pembroke studying the same subject as me would have the same lectures, which is different from how a university like Delhi University functions. So when it comes to choosing which college to apply to, it the main distinction in most cases would not be kind of academics, but kind of student life, the environment you want. So, for instance, I chose Peterhouse, which is both the oldest college and the smallest college at Cambridge, and I kind of wanted, that kind of smaller community feel where everyone knew everyone, kind of thing. Um, but there are colleges like Trinity, John's, which are much bigger with a much bigger size. So the primary distinction between colleges is kind of your day-to-day student life, um, and not the kind of lectures or academics you would have. Um, However, the entry requirements can differ for many subjects depending on the college you apply to, which is why The next section I'm talking about will require a lot of caveats, and you will need to check the websites of the individual colleges you're looking to apply to. Now, for some subjects such as medicine and law, you're expected to take an admissions test no matter what, and the scores you get in those exams are quite important in whether or not you would get an interview or not. For me, however, it was different. For a lot of colleges, you might not have an entrance exam at all, and you just have interviews. For me, at Peterhouse, they do have an admissions test for my subject, um, but this was offered to me to take after I got my interview, rather than it impacting whether or not I got one. So it was quite different from a regular admissions test. And yeah, it was just kind of writing an essay under timed conditions where I was emailed a question, or emailed a list of questions, and I had to choose one to write an essay under 60 minutes, which was now the personal statement used to be, when I was applying, a 500 word um, personal statement that you would write. Now, if you look at kind of personal statement examples online, you might get a bit confused because you'll find more common app US type essays, which are very different from what your university wants. So in the US, it's very much talking about your personality, your leadership traits, and people reference their personal experiences quite a lot. UK universities are very different, and they care more about kind of what Cambridge terms as super curricular activities rather than extracurricular activities. So they're more interested in how you kind of think about your subject, and whether you've done any sort of kind of critical engagement with it. So for STEM students, you could talk about kind of Olympiads, any hackathons you've done, or anything related to your subject that would show independent engagement. For humanities students, it normally ends up being kind of books, essay competitions, but one mistake people do is kind of focus on quantity over quality. In 500 words, you don't really have that much space to um, talk in deeply about, like 7 different researches. I only mentioned 2 books that I read, but I had quite a lot to say about it, and that's what they care about. They don't want you to just say, "Oh, I read so and so book." They want you to be able to articulate what you got out of the book, how that impacted your thinking, because that's what you'll be questioned on in your interviews. That's what they're interested to see. Um, so one of the books that I talked about was The New Jim Crow, which was written by Michelle Alexander, and it talked about how kind of drug laws in the U.S. served as a form of kind of mass incarceration for the African American community there. And I talked about how that kind of changed my thinking, how that related to kind of universal adult franchise, which I had kind of read about at school, and connected those 2 things. Um, just to caveat, the 500-word personal statement has now changed a little bit. The general idea still remain the same, the content kind of still remains the same, but now it's kind of been divided into short Q&As instead of one long statement. But the general idea and my general recommendation stay the same. The first one is to focus more on subject related stuff in academics as opposed to extracurriculars and personality. And the second would be to focus on quality over quantity. With Cambridge specifically, um, beyond the personal statement, there is something called a supplementary statement, which is optional, but I would recommend kind of filling it out. And I would take that up. So with the UK system, you only submit one personal statement for all of the universities you're applying to. So you don't get a chance to tailor your application to that specific course at Cambridge. So for me, I was applying more to kind of politics and international relations at other universities, but at Cambridge, it was kind of human, social, and political sciences, and I didn't talk about social anthropology in my personal statement at all. So I used my supplementary statement to talk about my interest in social anthropology. And for people who are applying for exactly the same course, you can still tailor it to talking more about the specific modules at Cambridge, specific professors in the department you're interested in, to just kind of uh, tailor it to Cambridge, which you won't get an opportunity to do in your personal statement. You would also require letters of recommendation from two of your teachers. And normally, yeah, this is quite easy to obtain in Indian schools. But it's also about making sure that your teachers understand you want to be what you want to be included. So I asked my political science teacher, for instance, to write me a letter of reference. And I kind of gave her a list of things that I would like her to include. So I had participated in a few MUNs. Um, I had a few research projects that I didn't have a chance to kind of talk about anywhere else in my application. And I asked her if she would be okay including it in my letter of reference, which she was very happy to do. For humanities subjects, your college would also normally ask you to submit written work. I had to submit two pieces of written work, which again was two essays I had to submit along with teachers' comments. And I think this can be a bit of a barrier because they explicitly say that these essays should not be written specifically for Cambridge and it should be a part of your curriculum. And with a lot of kind of CBSE subjects, or with a lot of CBSE schools, we don't really have that. Um, but I was able to kind of speak to my teachers and uh, have uh, written work included in my curriculum. Now, I think the scariest part of the process are is the interview. Cambridge interviews well above 70% of the people who apply, which is honestly one of the reasons I um, had for applying to Cambridge over Oxford. At Oxford, the interviews are much more selective, um, and with Cambridge, because they interview more, it does two things. One, you have more of a chance to prove yourself if your background is slightly unconventional, which in my case it was, and also you're able to get kind of more value out of the application process even if you don't get in. And so interviews are conducted either by professors or postdocs. I had two interviews with kind of four people collectively, two in each. My first interview was with the director of admissions at Peterhouse, as well as a sociology postdoc. And it basically involved them showing me kind of two passages, scholarly pieces of work, asking me to kind of compare them. What are the similarities? What are the differences? And if I'm being very honest, that was kind of my worst performance throughout the entire application process. Um, I did not understand what the passages were talking about. I could not understand the references. Um, and I did what I could in that time. I think partially I was just also kind of intimidated sitting next to a sitting in front of a Cambridge professor, and having to kind of talk about uh, academics. But I I just kind of struggled through the first 15 minutes. After that, it was the postdoc who started questioning me, and they focused more on things to do with my personal statement, but they really kind of grilled me on specific aspects of it. Part went relatively better, but yeah, I thought that I completely butchered my first interview. My next one was kind of half an hour later, and it was with two professors. One who was going to be the director of studies for HSPS, and another was actually a history professor at my college. Um, and that one was much better. Uh, uh, flowed much more smoothly. And once again, it was just them grilling me and going much deeper into things that were somewhat related to what I had talked about in in my written work or the admissions test that I had had a few days ago. Now, for STEM students, it would differ. They'll also have interviews, but then there the interviews would revolve more around kind of solving specific problem questions. But again, once again, this is not about kind of getting to the right answer. I had a lot of friends from STEM as well, and many of them didn't never got to the were never able to solve the problem they were given in interviews. It's honestly just about kind of how you think and how you approach the problem. And yeah, most people think they butchered the interview. That was the last part of the process for me. After my horrendous performance in the first round, I genuinely didn't think I would get an offer. And it was very surprising to me when I did. So that was everything in terms of how the application process of Cambridge looked like. Um, and then I got a conditional offer in January. Uh, I had to take my exams in kind of May and June. And it was after I took my exams that I got a conditional offer.